The decision did not arrive with shouting. It arrived in silence, inside a sealed royal file placed before King Charles, as if the monarchy itself had stopped breathing. By the time the final page was turned, one instruction stood above every other line. Meghan's HRH style was to be officially removed from royal records. Not softened, not delayed, removed. And with that single order, a private family wound became a constitutional shockwave. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles sat alone with his hand resting on the file, and for a moment, even the power of the crown seemed heavy enough to break him. HRH, short for His or Her Royal Highness, is a royal style used to show official closeness to the sovereign. And in this battle, those three letters meant recognition, belonging, and a place inside the monarchy's living memory. The king knew this was not just a change in wording. He knew it would reach into ceremonial lists, family archive indexes, correspondence templates, seating protocols, and every future palace document where Meghan's name still carried the shadow of royal standing. His pen hovered above the final page, and the silence around him became almost accusing, because this order touched Harry as much as it touched Meghan, and it touched the broken image of a father who had never found a clean way to rule his own family. A palace directive, a formal written command used to guide internal royal records and procedure, lay beneath his hand like a sentence already passed. Charles did not cross out Meghan's name himself. He did not slash through the line. He signed beneath it, and that was worse, because one senior aide watching from the edge of the room understood the truth at once. The machinery had started moving before the monarch ever reached the final page. Somewhere beyond those closed doors, Meghan received the news privately, and she did not explode. She did not demand an answer. She simply went still, as if the finality had entered the room before the words were fully spoken. That silence carried more pain than fury, because she understood exactly what had happened. The palace had not merely corrected a record, it had decided who belonged inside the official story and who would be pushed to its edge. Charles had signed the order, but the deeper struggle was only beginning, because once a name is altered in royal memory, every person connected to it must decide what they are willing to lose next. And before the full weight of the order could be understood, the palace had to face the people whose lives were now trapped inside that single royal instruction. Every royal crisis has a public face, but this one had several private hearts breaking at once. Charles carried the burden of the crown. Meghan carried the sting of erasure. Harry carried the fury of a son who believed the palace had crossed a final line. William carried the cold responsibility of future rule. And somewhere between duty and blood, the family found itself divided by a title that had become a battlefield. Charles saw the order as containment, not cruelty, but that did not make the cost lighter. The crown, meaning the monarchy's authority and duty, passed through the sovereign, demanded clean lines, where family pain had created confusion. The king believed the HRH removal had become necessary because the old arrangement left Meghan close enough to the royal story to stir dispute, yet distant enough to expose every wound. HRH, a royal style showing official closeness to the sovereign, had turned from 3 letters into a symbol of who belonged, who served, and who would be remembered inside palace history. Meghan stood beside Harry after the news arrived, and her silence struck him harder than any outburst could have done. Harry wanted to defend her, wanted to confront his father, wanted to tear the decision out by its roots, but the signed order made anger feel useless. He looked at Meghan and understood that the palace had not simply removed wording from a record. It had made the half-open door feel closed at last. William prepared for a private briefing with the same cold discipline that made people fear him and trust him at once. The prince chose each word before he entered, knowing satisfaction would make him look heartless, while hesitation would make him look unfit for the future waiting ahead. Camilla privately asked Charles whether this order would inflame the family again, and the queen consort watched his face for an answer. He gave none. That silence told her the palace feared the emotional cost but feared uncertainty even more. A trusted courtier later revealed through a documented palace account that the change reached deeper than public naming. It altered Meghan's place in future family histories, archive references, and ceremonial memory, turning the decision from symbolic correction into permanent separation. Charles had signed to protect the institution, but Harry saw a father choosing distance. Meghan felt a record becoming a verdict, and William understood that one buried incident from the past still had the power to drag them all back into the fire. To understand why Charles finally signed the order, the palace had to return to the moment everyone tried to bury, but no one truly forgot. The order did not begin with a pen. It began months earlier, during a private memorial reception at Windsor, when one conversation changed the temperature of the room. What should have been a quiet evening of remembrance became the moment senior royals realized the old arrangement could not survive. Later, they would call it the Windsor Memorial Exchange. In truth, it was the point of no return. Meghan held the printed program in her hand, and the first change appeared small enough to dismiss until its meaning became impossible to ignore. Her name had been placed outside the central royal family sequence, not erased, not openly rejected, but moved just far enough to send a message. A commemorative archive program, meaning the official printed record prepared for a royal memorial and preserved for palace history, was never just paper inside that world. It told future readers who stood close to the heart of the family and who had been quietly shifted away. Meghan's face tightened as she studied the order of names, because she understood that the palace had already begun repositioning her before anyone had said it aloud. Harry saw the change in her expression before he saw the page, and his anger rose instantly. He stepped toward the aide and demanded an explanation, but the aide stayed controlled, repeating that the arrangement followed updated internal guidance. Harry heard insult hidden inside procedure. William watched from across the room, and the prince's expression hardened because the argument had entered a sacred family setting, where grief was supposed to hold everyone still. Charles was told before the night ended that the exchange had unsettled senior staff and turned a private tension into a visible fracture. The king listened without interruption, but his silence did not mean peace. Windsor, a royal residence tied to ceremony, memory, and family duty, made the clash feel even more damaging, because the setting gave the moment historical weight. A senior private secretary quietly recorded the confrontation in handwritten notes, later preserved in a documented palace account that would become part of the file placed before Charles. Those notes did not describe noise. They described a line being crossed. By morning, the monarch was warned that the issue was no longer one program or one wounded reaction. It had become a question of whether disputed status could remain unresolved inside official records. William read the Windsor notes days later, and something in him changed. He saw not embarrassment, but danger. Meghan had felt the palace moving against her, Harry had challenged the system in front of its guardians, and Charles now faced a truth he could not keep postponing. And when the buried notes finally reached the family table, the silence around the crown shattered into the confrontation everyone had feared. The confrontation happened behind closed doors, but its force moved through the palace like a storm. Harry entered first, anger already burning behind his restraint. Charles stood waiting, the signed directive lying between them. Meghan was not in the room, yet her absence made her presence heavier. William remained near the far side of the table, still and watchful. No one raised their voice at first. That made it worse. Harry looked at his father and asked the question that tore through every careful phrase the palace had prepared. Did the crown now matter more than his own son? Charles absorbed it without moving, and for a moment, the king looked less like a ruler than a man trapped inside the duty he had chosen. A palace directive, meaning a formal written order used to guide royal records and internal procedure, sat on the table like proof that private pain had become official action. Harry knew what HRH meant now more than ever. It was not just a royal style showing closeness to the sovereign. It had become the line between being remembered as part of the center and being pushed toward the edge. Charles finally answered, and his voice carried no triumph. He said the order had not been written against love, but against confusion. Harry reacted as if that single word had turned his wife's pain into policy, and his control nearly broke. William stepped in carefully, not as an aggressor, but as the future king forced to witness what unresolved status had done to the family. The prince revealed through a documented palace briefing that the Windsor Memorial Exchange was not the only concern. There had been other record disputes, other moments when palace aides warned that the old compromise could no longer hold. Charles watched Harry hear this and understood the damage was deepening with every sentence. The Duke reached toward the signed directive, not to steal it, but to challenge its power. The monarch placed his hand over the file before Harry could touch it, and that small movement said what no speech could soften. The decision would not be taken back. William did not look away. He understood that the gesture had ended one argument and opened another. Harry saw his father protecting the document. Charles saw his son grieving through anger, and Meghan's absent name filled the room with more force than any person standing there. Yet the most painful truth was still waiting beneath the confrontation. This order was not simply a father's choice, but a preview of where power inside the monarchy had already begun to move. Power inside a palace rarely announces itself. It gathers quietly, through folders, meetings, pauses, and the careful placement of a single sentence. William did not need to shout to shape what came next. His influence was colder than anger and stronger than outrage. He understood that the monarchy could survive family sorrow, but it could not survive blurred lines. And so the future king began tightening the circle. William sat with a senior advisor and paused when Meghan's name appeared on the review sheet. He was not smiling. He was not celebrating. The prince understood that a correction on paper could still feel like rejection in the heart, and that was why every word had to be exact. A royal framework, meaning the planned structure that connects titles, duties, records, and future roles, now had to be built without contradiction. The palace could not keep one version of belonging in public emotion and another version in official files. Charles watched his son during the briefing, and the king saw a kind of discipline he once hoped would never be needed inside his own family. The monarch had signed the order, but William was shaping what came after it. Aides began reviewing old documents, event books, archive labels, ceremonial protocols, and internal correspondence lines, because once Meghan's HRH style was removed from one place, it had to be removed everywhere. The palace memory still carried it. Ceremonial protocols, the formal rules that decide names, seating, titles, and order at royal events, mattered because they turned private status into public position. One wrong line could reopen the whole battle. A private memo surfaced through a documented palace account, and its key phrase chilled the room. Future royal records must distinguish between family connection and royal function. That sentence changed everything. Meghan could remain connected by marriage and history, but the records would no longer present her as part of working royal authority. Camilla quietly warned Charles that Harry would see William's hand behind every correction, every altered page, every removed style. The queen consort knew the Duke would not separate the king's signature from the prince's influence, and Charles knew she was right. William kept his voice steady, but the future king understood the accusation before it arrived. Harry would see strategy. Meghan would feel erasure. Charles would carry the blame. Still, the machine moved forward, because the palace had chosen order over softness. But once the palace machinery began moving, the pain left the meeting rooms and reached the person whose name had been altered forever. The most devastating moment was not the signing, it was the reading. Meghan sat with the revised royal reference page in front of her and saw what had changed in black and white. The absence was small enough to fit on one line, yet large enough to rewrite years of struggle, marriage, exile, pride, and pain. For the first time, the battle was no longer spoken through headlines. It was printed as fact. Meghan read the altered entry once, then again, as if the second reading might return what the first had taken away. It did not. HRH, a royal style showing official closeness to the sovereign, had vanished from the line beside her name, and the space it left behind felt louder than any palace statement. A royal reference page, meaning an official internal entry used to guide how names and titles appear in palace records, now carried the new reality with cold precision. The palace called it administrative consistency, but Meghan felt the personal meaning underneath it. This was not just about letters. It was about whether her years inside the royal story would be remembered as belonging or as interruption. Harry watched her set the page down slowly, and his anger gave way to something worse: helplessness. The Duke had argued before. He had challenged before. He had believed some part of the palace could still be forced to answer. But now the title removal had moved beyond debate and entered the system. Meghan's expression shifted from disbelief to wounded composure, and Harry saw her gather herself in the way people do when they refuse to break in front of the thing that hurt them. Then came the deeper blow. Meghan noticed the change did not appear in only one document. It stretched through linked records, archive references, event registers, and internal title lists, proving the order had been planned carefully and carried out completely. Linked records, the connected palace files that keep names and titles consistent across departments, mattered because one change could travel everywhere without another public word being spoken. A phone call from London confirmed what the pages already suggested. The alteration had been circulated internally, and no private appeal could quietly stop it now. Harry looked at Meghan, and she looked back without tears, but the silence between them held everything. The palace had made its move. Charles had signed it. William's framework had carried it forward. And now husband and wife were left standing inside the aftermath, no longer fighting a rumor or a headline, but facing a finished record. And when the documents were finally pushed aside, husband and wife were left with the one question no palace order could answer. What remained when recognition was taken away? There were no courtiers in the room when the turning point came. No advisors, no palace language, no careful phrases designed to survive public scrutiny. Only Harry and Meghan, sitting across from each other after the longest day of their royal lives, facing the truth that the palace had made its decision and would not reverse it. Anger had burned hot. Now something colder arrived: clarity. Harry looked at Meghan and said the words that hurt him before they reached her. He was sorry. Sorry he had not protected her from another royal wound. Sorry his family had found a way to turn old pain into a fresh verdict. Meghan stopped him before the apology could become a collapse, because she refused to let the palace define their marriage as defeat. HRH, a royal style showing official closeness to the sovereign, had been removed from official records, but she would not let those letters decide the value of her life. Harry heard the steadiness in her voice, and it pulled him back from fury. Official recognition, the formal acknowledgement given through titles, records, and palace language, had always carried power because it told the world who stood inside the royal circle. But Meghan asked the question the palace could not control: was recognition the same as worth? The silence after that question changed the room. She admitted the removal hurt, not because 3 letters had vanished, but because the act said the monarchy wanted the public to see distance as final. Harry understood then that rage would only keep them chained to the same door that had already closed. Meghan chose not to plead for restoration. She would not ask Charles to reverse the order. She would not beg William's future system to make space for her. She would not chase acceptance from an institution that had already spoken in ink. That choice turned humiliation into command. Harry nodded slowly, and the Duke's anger settled into distance with dignity. He agreed their answer would not be shouting, not another desperate appeal, not another fight over a record the palace had already changed. Meghan had been wounded, but she had not been reduced. Harry had been furious, but he had not been broken. Together they understood that the crown could remove a style, but it could not write the final meaning of their marriage. The private wound was no longer only private, though. Once the world saw what had been done, the argument would move beyond family pain and become a national fight over memory, belonging, and power. But beyond the closed door, Britain was already waking to the news, and one image would capture the public mood better than any palace statement. By morning, the private order had become a public earthquake. The monarchy's internal correction was now printed across breakfast tables, debated in studios, whispered outside palace gates, and argued over by people who had never seen the file, but felt the force of its meaning. Some called it discipline, others called it cruelty. But one front page turned the entire decision into a single, unforgettable image. Charles saw it before the first briefing began, and the king folded the newspaper without saying a word. The headline read, "The Final Removal," placed above a close image of a royal record book where the letters HRH had faded beside Meghan's name. HRH, a royal style showing official closeness to the sovereign, had become the center of a national argument, because people understood those letters were not only decoration, they carried memory, rank, belonging, and rejection. Charles knew his signature had not ended the dispute. It had released it. William watched a broadcaster frame the decision as the cleanest break of the modern reign, and the prince's face tightened because clean decisions can still leave blood on the floor. A modern reign, meaning the current period of rule under a living monarch, depends not only on tradition, but on public trust, and this story had struck both at once. The debate was no longer only about Meghan, it was about whether the monarchy had the right to rewrite its own family records so sharply, and whether history could be made orderly without becoming cruel. Outside Buckingham Palace, the crowd grew by the hour. Some signs praised Charles for protecting royal clarity. Others answered with one sharp line, "You cannot erase a woman from history." Buckingham Palace, the sovereign's main public office and symbol of royal authority, mattered because every argument outside its gates felt like a judgment placed at the monarchy's doorstep. Meghan did not need to stand there for her name to dominate the air. Harry did not need to speak for his anger to be understood. Inside the palace, William saw that public noise would fade, but the deeper question would remain. Charles had acted to protect the crown, yet the king now faced the cost of making family pain official. The order had moved from file to front page, from private wound to public verdict, and still the final meaning was not in the shouting. It waited in the silence behind palace doors, where every person involved had to face what the monarchy had chosen to become. And when the shouting faded, the true verdict of the moment emerged, not from the crowd, but from the silence it left inside the royal family. In the end, the order did exactly what it was designed to do. It removed ambiguity. It drew a line. It told the palace, the public, and the family that royal records would no longer carry unresolved tensions into the future. But the victory was not clean. Charles had protected the crown, yet wounded the father. Meghan had lost official styling, yet refused to lose herself. Harry had lost another bridge, yet found the truth of where he stood. Charles sat alone after the final internal confirmation arrived, and the king set his glasses beside the file, as if the smallest movement might expose the sorrow he was trying to hide. HRH, a royal style showing official closeness to the sovereign, had now been removed from Meghan's official records, and the change could no longer be treated as temporary, symbolic, or unfinished. The crown, meaning the monarchy's authority and duty carried through the sovereign, had chosen institutional clarity over emotional compromise. That choice defined the monarch's reign because it proved the palace would protect order, even when order demanded pain. Meghan closed the revised record page with steady hands, and her composure became her final answer. She understood that the decision had permanently reshaped her place in royal memory, turning her from an unresolved royal figure into a family member, officially separated from royal function. But Meghan also understood something the palace could not control. A record could remove letters. It could not command identity. Harry recognized the harder truth slowly. The monarchy had stopped negotiating with his past. The family he left, and the institution he challenged, were no longer willing to separate pain from policy, and that realization hurt more than the order itself. William understood the future hidden inside the decision. The prince saw the model for his own reign: fewer blurred boundaries, fewer emotional exceptions, and a colder but more stable crown. He did not celebrate it, he accepted it. Charles had ruled by choosing duty over tenderness, and the king would carry that choice long after the final page was filed away. Meghan had endured by refusing to be reduced to a record entry. Harry had learned that some royal doors do not close loudly, they close officially. The monarchy survived, but it survived by becoming harder. No further bridge remained to cross. The order had been signed, the records had been changed, and the monarchy had chosen the version of itself it was willing to protect. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.